You ever try to do the math on how many people died as a result of your little collaboration?
That is exactly what we're going to do. I'll be looking at every kill Kratos is responsible for, whether it's done directly or indirectly. There is a lot to cover, so let's get straight into it. I previously made some kill count videos of the franchise, but my method wasn't entirely accurate for the purpose of this video. I focused on a kill-death ratio, which means I'd recount kills when I replayed sections after dying. So the first thing I did was go back and amend the true kill count for each game to find out how many enemies I killed directly. Obviously, this number will vary depending on difficulty and the amount of exploring done. I played on normal difficulty and focused on the story mode for each game to get the most accurate number possible. This ranges from all the various enemies I fought in my playthroughs, from the basic legionnaires to minotaurs and gorgons, as well as different gods and mythical monsters like the Hydra. It also includes random civilians caught in the crossfire, or people sacrificed in order for Kratos to proceed on his journey. I did not count enemies that aren't technically alive, such as the Colossus of Rhodes or the Hands of Hades. I also didn't include any humans killed in the underworld, since they're already dead, and god damn it, that ship captain deserves some mercy. So now that the rules have been set for what counts as a death, let's find out Kratos' first recorded kill. In 2010, the now defunct Wildstorm Comics released a 6-part series that shows a young Kratos participating in the Spartan custom of purging the weak from their population by yeeting a baby off a cliff. I hadn't read this until I started this video, so throwing a baby into the abyss was definitely not my first guess. We don't see him kill anyone else as a kid in Ghost of Sparta, even though his first attempt at Ares' life occurred after the kidnap of his brother Deimos. Due to Athena's intervention, he was spared and went on to join the Spartan army. He proved himself to be a highly capable warrior and rose quickly in the ranks. He undoubtedly had to kill people in order to achieve this, but there are no records of his achievements during this time, so it remains unclear how many died on his path to becoming the greatest Spartan warrior. He met his wife Lysandra and they had a baby together named Calliope. However, she was due to be cast into the chasm due to her plague-ridden birth. Kratos sought the ambrosia to heal his daughter while unknowingly being chosen as Ares' champion for a wager between the gods. While he begins his search, Hades sends a talking phoenix to dissuade him from continuing, which meets a violent end. Eventually, the Spartan captain Nikos informs Kratos he will serve under him as they search for the ambrosia, and along the way we see Kratos slaughtering 3 satyrs before the Spartans are confronted by Poseidon's champion Herodias. We witness Kratos taking out 2 of his men, while the Spartans take on the rest. He turns his attention to Herodias and ensures Poseidon loses the wager by killing him too. In this wager, the gods made sure each of their champions had something to fight for. Herodias came from a village on the island of Thera that had the plague placed upon them by Poseidon. Despite the gods getting the ball rolling here, Kratos doomed his village to certain death by ensuring Herodias could not get the ambrosia. Coming up with a figure for this village was difficult since it's never explicitly defined. However, records indicate in the ruins of ancient Thera that they had a theater that could fit around 1,500 people. Although it's believed that was larger than the population of the village, for the purpose of this video we can run with that number, giving Kratos a massive spike in deaths. Afterwards, they sail towards their destination, and out of poor sportsmanship, Poseidon sinks the Spartan's boat, and that leads to him slaying a sea serpent in the depths of the Aegean Sea. They find land only to be attacked by Artemis's champion Pathia, who leads Corrosion warriors into battle against the Spartans. A panel shows Kratos taking out just one of them and then leaves his fellow warriors to fight the rest while he cuts their leader in half. The women in their village were made infertile by Artemis, so Kratos is not responsible for any more deaths with Pathia's demise. Soon afterwards, cheating-ass Hades sends fire down on the Spartans as soon as they emerge into the sunlight, which kills Captain Nikos and makes Kratos their leader. He now becomes responsible for the 40 men they have left. Eventually, they reach the cave containing the Tree of Life, so Kratos leaves his men at the entrance while he proceeds inside and eliminates Helios' champion Serion. It's unclear what he fought for outside of simping for Helios, so no additional deaths to add here. His victory is short-lived though, because Ulrich and his barbarians rush in to steal the ambrosia from Kratos. We see Kratos brutalizing a barbarian himself along with 2 rocks. Then Hades interferes yet again by sending hands up to attack Kratos' men while their captain abandons them in pursuit of Ulrich, dooming all of his men to be dragged into the underworld. Kratos catches up to Ulrich and is able to wrestle the ambrosia away from him, then leaves him behind as rocks rip him to shreds, making this the first instance of Kratos defeating the barbarian. Ulrich is revived by Hades, and upon returning home he finds his father succumb to the illness placed upon him, adding another death to Kratos' total and elevating Ulrich as the barbarian king. which will come back to haunt Kratos later. The Spartan is able to return home and prevent his daughter's death, for now. An unknown amount of time passes, but we know Kratos is now captain of the Spartan army. In the first flashback in God of War 1, an oracle looks into Kratos' past, where we witness 3 brutal murders committed by the Spartan. It's unknown when these occurred exactly, but it appears to be during various campaigns he went on in the name of Sparta. In the next flashback, it's explained by the narrator that Kratos and his army face Ulrich and his barbarians in order to prevent the destruction of Sparta. Ulrich's army was much larger and more ferocious than Kratos's. When they clashed, the barbarians proved to be too much and killed every single Spartan save for Kratos. Here's where things get tricky though, because estimating the size of armies during this time is a crapshoot. The series takes place in an alternate version of ancient Greece, but using real-world information, we can guess that it takes place after the Persian invasion of Attica seen in Chains of Olympus, and sometime before the Peloponnesian War. Now that the rough time period has been set, we can utilize figures from the Battle of Plataea, where Sparta sent around 45,000 men to fight and reportedly fielded their largest army ever. We can guess that Kratos would gather an equally large army to meet Ulrich, which means that he was able to eliminate all 45,000 Spartans that Kratos commanded. And since the captain is responsible for his men, we see a huge jump in deaths here. Now desperate, Kratos begs for Ares' assistance and pledges his soul to him in exchange for his help. In response, the god of war descends from the sky and decimates the barbarian army in one fell swoop. Trying to estimate the size of Ulrich's army is a much more difficult task. The first thing we need to do is figure out where Ulrich is from exactly. Based on his appearance, he resembles depictions of Germanic barbarians, but in the flashbacks it's explained he hails from the east. Considering he doesn't look anything like the Persians shown in Chains of Olympus, it's likely Ulrich is Thracian. The region squabbled a lot, so massive armies weren't seen very often until King Sitalces reportedly rose an army 150,000 strong in order to invade Macedon. Ulrich wore the title as king, and it's not far-fetched to think he wanted to throw everything Thrace had at Kratos to get his revenge. So we watch Ares completely wipe out an army 150,000 strong. This gives Kratos the chance he needs to prevent his own death and take Ulrich out a second time. In the final flashback in the game, we hear the narrator detailing the Spartans' killing spree in Ares' name. We see 9 people die on screen, but it confirms that entire armies also fell before Kratos. It's never specified what armies he faced, so even if we consider the strongest city-states in Greece, we can automatically rule out Athens, which we see get trounced later. Delphi was well known, but not for its army, which leaves Thebes and Corinth. Again, accurate army sizes are difficult to come by, and even though it came after the Peloponnesian War, we can obtain figures from the Corinthian War to estimate. Thebes was able to field an army 8,500 strong against Sparta, and Corinth fielded 3,000. By conquering the strongest city-states in their regions, we can reasonably assume any smaller ones would bend the knee to Sparta. Next, we see Kratos command his men to burn a village to the ground for worshipping Athena. We don't know how many people reside in this village exactly, but we see 29 dead on the ground alongside another 10 inside the temple. Considering we briefly see other homes beyond the ones on the main road, we can guess that this village housed roughly 100 people, possibly more, that were all slaughtered at Kratos' command. And of course, the event that set the franchise in motion is when Kratos, blinded by his bloodlust, cut down his wife Lysandra and his daughter Calliope. The murder of his wife and daughter is the canon event in Kratos' life, and where the bodies really begin to pile up. He's already racked up over 200,000 deaths due to his actions, which is just insane. Now, before we go back to the very first God of War game, we have a couple prequels we need to consider. Ascension is canonically the first game in the franchise, and thankfully it's much easier to count up since there are no mass deaths caused by Kratos' actions. We pick up about 6 months after Lysandra's and Calliope's deaths, and Kratos vows to never serve Ares again after his betrayal. Ares sicks the Furies on Kratos, and with the aid of the demigod Orcos, Kratos successfully breaks free from their torture. Throughout the game, I got 666 kills through direct gameplay, meaning I wiped out various monsters myself, including the 3 Fury sisters Megara, Tisiphone and her daemon, and their leader Alecto. He also brutally ripped apart Pollux and Castor in what is easily his largest kill to date with Aegean and the massive parasitic hands he had to contend with. As far as kills that are done outside of gameplay, we watched the warrior from Ascension's multiplayer mode get crushed by one of the parasites. He's being counted because Kratos led the beast there, which was searching for Kratos to begin with, and decided to off this dude for fun. During the fight between Aegean and Megara, Kratos uses a parasitic hand in combat, which results in the giant nomming it to death. It takes a while to see any more indirect kills, but eventually Kratos hires a ship to escort him to Delos that contains 6 other men on it. As they sail away, it's seen getting destroyed by a sea monster in the distance. Finally, at the end of the game, after Kratos has killed the Furies, Orcos reveals the only way to free himself and Kratos from Ares' bond is to kill him. This is one of the only instances we see Kratos reluctantly end a life, but he does so here in a failed attempt to get rid of his nightmares. The next game is another prequel that was released originally on the PSP. Like Ascension, Chains of Olympus is fairly straightforward, with no mass casualties caused by our homeboy. It takes place about 4.5 years after Ascension, with Kratos halfway finished with his 10-year sentence to serve the gods. He's dispatched to Attica to fight the Persians, and afterwards watches as Helios is captured, which shrouds Greece in darkness. Tasked by the Olympians to restore the sun god, Kratos battles against 538 enemies, including the Persian king and his basilisk, the ferryman of the dead, Charon, and the antagonist Persephone, who simply wanted to divorce Hades and take the whole world with her. Every single kill in this game is done through gameplay, which made it by far the easiest to calculate. And now we're back at the original game, as he is finally given the chance to fight the god that forced him into killing his family. With Athena's aid, he seeks out Pandora's box to gain the power to go toe-to-toe with Ares. Throughout his journey, Kratos downs 1,182 monsters in all, with the Hydra, Pandora's guardian, and of course the God of War himself, counting towards the ever-increasing death count. Outside of what we saw in flashbacks, there aren't a lot of indirect kills here. Most famously, the ship captain is ruthlessly killed for no good reason, and 3 more legionnaires are tallied up in a cutscene when Kratos arrives too late to save the women and children on the ship. The final indirect kill caused by Kratos is the accidental death of a woman who ran from him out of pure fright. She knew Kratos by reputation alone, and mistakenly fell off a balcony to her death during Ares' attack on Athens. That concludes the first game, but before we move on to the next one in the timeline, we need to show snippets of Wildstorm's comic again. There are sections that take place between the first game and Ghost of Sparta, where Kratos seeks to destroy the Ambrosia so Ares cannot be resurrected by the gods. In doing so, he encounters Shelob, but unlike the Hobbits, he hastily removes her from existence and continues on to re-kill 7 of his resurrected Spartan soldiers. He finally reaches the Tree of Life again and learns that the island it sits on is actually alive. Aegis is a Hecatoncheires and the brother of Aegean, who aims to use the Ambrosia to bring his brother back to life, but also needs the Ambrosia to live as well. Kratos don't give a crap though, and expeditiously sets it ablaze and earns what is probably his largest kill of his career. Next up is the second and final PSP game, Ghost of Sparta, where we learn both his mom and brother are victims of the gods as well. This winds up being the straw that broke the camel's back that sets Kratos down his pantheon-destroying path. But before we get there, we need to see how many died during the course of this game. As far as gameplay goes, this is the only one that matches my kill total from my previous video, since my deaths in that game didn't force me into replaying combat sections. Kratos takes out 633 innocent Greeks and monsters alike, with the unique enemies being Scylla, his mother Callisto, Death's daughter Erinyes, the Piraeus lion, and the loser that set him free, King Midas, and the final boss is Death himself, Thanatos. Early on in the game, Kratos destabilizes a volcano which erupts and sinks Atlantis. Coming up with a population for a fictional city was a difficult task, especially since Plato claimed the city housed millions upon millions of residents, with some researchers stating that the city could have upwards of 60 million people or more. Those figures are impossible in the ancient world, so I looked for a smaller and more realistic number based on the location of the volcano. While inside of it, he released the Titan Thera, which isn't an actual titan in Greek mythology. Instead, it's the name of the island where a volcano erupted around 1600 BC. The island today is known as Santorini, which lies 88 miles or 141 kilometers north of Crete, where Kratos lands after the volcano catapults him out during the eruption. This volcano devastated the Minoan civilization and wiped out an estimated 40,000 people, which is a way more conservative and realistic estimate on Atlantis' fictional population. But that's not all the damage damage the volcano does, because while Kratos lands in the city of Heraklion, we can see the devastation it's causing there as well. On top of that disaster, the citizens are being targeted by Death's minions at the order of his daughter Erinys while they search for Kratos. A combination of these two factors means another mass casualty event, but how do we determine how many are dying here? Europe's oldest city, Knossos, lies just south of Heraklion and contained an estimated 11,000 inhabitants before the Minoans fell. It's difficult to determine how many Greeks populated this city, and that's the closest information I can find. So between the volcano and Death's army, we can confidently say roughly 11,000 people died on Crete here. To top it all off, there are some more deaths Kratos is responsible for, since his quest angered the gods and resulted in the deaths of 12 additional soldiers between Erinys and Poseidon. Moving on is the next game in the series I'm sure the vast majority of God of War fans have never played, and that's because it's an outdated mobile game. I didn't cover this on my kill count series, so I searched this platform and found the full game uploaded by Gaming Ninja, and counted every individual kill they got throughout. It's a very simple game with an equally simple plot. Kratos is framed for killing Hera's ugly beast Argos, and sets out to find who did it. He never actually discovers who the assassin is, however the events of the game serve to further fracture the relationship between Kratos and the Olympians. All 356 kills in this game are from gameplay, with only one unique enemy being the son of Hermes and messenger of the gods Syrinx. This is where we see many familiar names get crossed off the kill list. But things start with a massive bang when Kratos falls to Earth to conquer the last standing city in Greece. In the God of War 2 novel, the gods confirm that Kratos by this point has conquered all of Greece to make Sparta the most powerful city in the region. But this doesn't mean he killed everyone in the process. Using Alexander the Great's history, he was able to quell revolts in Greece by making an example of Thebes. It resulted in the destruction of the city and the murder of 6,000 people. It's easy to think something similar could happen if a much more powerful foe like Kratos did the same thing. So with that in mind, we can effectively add 6,000 more to his death tally before he lands in the defiant city of Rhodes. Determining how many die in the Battle of Rhodes is another difficult task. We have no idea how large Kratos' army is, so I began by figuring out roughly how large Rhodes is. In 305 and 304 BC, the city endured a siege with roughly 6,000 citizens defending their home. During the battle, Kratos and his army seemed to be winning handily, and that's due to the uneven odds Rhodes is facing. The Spartan warriors are far more competent and very likely outnumber the Rhodians. When looking back at that 45,000 figure from the Battle of Plataea, the breakdown shows 8,000 true Spartan hoplites. That was their most highly trained and fiercest warriors. It stands to reason Kratos would bring along his best in order to platinum Greece. Now with that in mind, the city has 14,000 soldiers clashing, and who knows how many died during combat. But what we do know for certain is that Zeus came down to stamp out Kratos' campaign, and in one maneuver wipes out every single person in the city except for one surviving Spartan. Zeus kills Kratos here, and while I guess we chose to be a rampaging a-hole, I won't count his own death as part of this, even though you could probably make an argument for it. Kratos of course climbs his way out of the underworld and back into the city, and then sends the last Spartan back home to defend the city, which is all for naught since Zeus wants to make a point. To punish Kratos and his followers, Zeus obliterates the city of Sparta and everyone within it, except for this one resilient warrior. It's difficult to parse out how many people lived in the city itself, since Sparta was far more spread out than other cities such as Athens. It's estimated around this time period that Sparta had around 30,000 citizens and slaves living there, which adds a fat chunk to Kratos' body count. Throughout the course of the game, I counted up exactly 1,000 kills between all the classic Greek monsters and the unique enemies fought. We get to eliminate some of the biggest names in Greek mythology, with Theseus being the first, then murdering Ulrich for a third time, Medusa's sister Uriel, little wimpy-ass Perseus, the insane Icarus, unfortunately killing the last Spartan before the frickin' Kraken, and the three Fates bringing up the rear. In order to face Zeus, Kratos winds up doing the time warp and prevents Zeus from wiping out everyone in Rhodes. That means both armies and Sparta are brought back, but since Kratos' actions led to their death before, I'm not going to retract those. The final kill of the game comes when Kratos attempts to deliver the finishing blow to Zeus, but Athena jumps in the way and gives the cowardly Olympian king enough time to get away, which leads us directly into the grand finale of the Greek saga. Anyone that clicked on this video was probably waiting for this specific moment. Kratos rides Gaia up Mount Olympus with her Titan brethren and declares the god's downfall. This is the game that shows the most famous Olympians getting bodied by our boy Kratos. He winds up adding an extra 1,140 kills to the count, and this includes several unique foes that all meet a painful and brutal end. Poseidon is the first big name crossed off the list alongside his epic-looking hippocampi. He dominates Hades in his own domain, ends the fire steeds, and famously rips the head off their master. Soon after that, he kills the Titan Perseus, knowing they are not on the same side as he initially thought, then goes on to catch up to and kill Hermes. He follows that up with some brotherly love and ends Hercules' life, and then his grandfather Kratos. He ends the miserable life of Hephaestus, the giant arachnid Scorpius, and finally Gaia and the big daddy himself, Zeus. Some of these big name kills bring catastrophic consequences to the people of Greece. Kratos snaps Poseidon's neck and drops him into the ocean, which results in an epic flood that covers the entire country outside of its highest peaks. On top of that, Hermes' death releases a plague on what's left, and Helios' absence sends the land into eternal night. Kratos effectively wipes out nearly everyone living in Greece. The country is incredibly mountainous, so it's likely quite a few people remained after Poseidon's death. However, the havoc caused by Helios and Hermes' deaths would have effectively killed off a good percentage of the surviving citizens. In 400 BC, it was estimated that Greece contained 7.5 million to 10 million people. I hesitate to count the higher end because it was confirmed in God of War Valhalla that Greece was able to rebuild after Kratos left. That means some people survived the devastation Kratos caused. So with that in mind, I'll count the lower end of that figure and estimate that 7.5 million Greeks were wiped out as Kratos ended the life of the Olympians. But before we move out of Greece, there are 3 more deaths Kratos is responsible for. The first is Zeus' wife Hera. His deeds also lead to the death of Icarus' father Daedalus. And lastly, he lets go of Pandora and sends her to her death when Zeus' words get him real aggro. And that finishes out the Greek saga, with Kratos snuffing out millions of lives through his actions. The Norse saga comes next, but first is a short comic series titled Fallen God that is meant to bridge the gap between Greece and Scandinavia. But it doesn't really do that, to be honest. It basically just shows Kratos walking in circles in Egypt, repeatedly telling people to leave him alone, while trying in vain to get rid of the Blades of Chaos. His past will always haunt him, and the Blades will always come back. There's only a few kills that happen in this comic, and none of them are human. He's attacked by wolves, and even though we don't see a panel where he actually kills them, I mean, come on. It's Kratos we're talking about here. He reluctantly defends a village against 2 giant creatures. The first is a crocodile, and the second is a hippo. He's told he fulfilled his purpose here and leaves for a snowier locale. The next piece of canon Kratos shows up in is Shovel Knight as a boss, but it doesn't add anything to his death count, so we can move into a piece of promotional material for 2018's God of War. In conjunction with Facebook, a text-based game was made using Messenger. It focuses on a young Atreus before his mother Faye passed away. He encounters dangers in the woods beyond their home and successfully takes a Draugr out himself. But this isn't a video about the boy. We only care what Kratos is up to, and that's killing the second Draugr that attacks his son. A few moments later, they encounter a revenant and a pack of 6 wolves in the wild, but the wolves are chased off by some deer, and the witch is left to contend with father and son, who team up against her for the second and last kill of this game. There's also a podcast titled The Lost Pages of Norse Myth that provides some really interesting lore for the series, but it primarily focuses on stories outside of Kratos. One of the pages is this story in another format, so I'm not counting that one again. Next, we move into the prequel comics that focuses on Kratos training himself to control his rage. He fails. A lot. We see him succeed once as he fends off wolves without killing them, but when a couple trolls roll up looking to smash, he goes insano mode and slaughters them. Sometime later, he saves a man from getting killed by a bear, by killing the beast himself. But he finds out later that wasn't a bear, but a berserker, and his brothers have come to tussle with Kratos. This stupid decision results in the deaths of their entire group, as Kratos kills 2 near his home and chases the other through the woods. He loses his tracks, so Atreus leads his father to a seer that shows where the berserker's house is. He lets his rage control him here, taking out all 5 men inside, and upon returning to the seer, finds the old berserker there seeking revenge. He's killed, but Kratos is too late to save the seer, who told him earlier there would be a price to be paid for the information she gave him, which is her death and another one Kratos is responsible for. We are now officially into the Norse saga, and thankfully this game is significantly easier to count because the realms are mostly abandoned due to Odin's actions, which means there are no mass casualty events. Kratos simply wants to spread Faye's ashes and is forced to go on a much longer adventure than anticipated with his son Atreus at his side. Him getting roped into a conflict with the Norse gods all stems from a misunderstanding, with Baldur thinking Kratos is the last known giant, and Kratos believing Baldur is someone that knows him as the ghost of Sparta. The rules will remain largely the same here. However, since Kratos has a partner at his side, there will be times where Atreus is responsible for his own kills, like when he murders Modi against the wishes of Kratos. The vast majority of the kills during the course of this game occur during combat, with many trolls, Hraeslir, Magni, and of course Baldur being the highlights. Just a handful of kills happen outside of gameplay, with Kratos offing 2 elves and the dragon Baldur rode in on, as well as Mimir, who gets brought back by Freya. There are also 9 optional Valkyrie fights that are confirmed to be canon. Kratos frees them from their mortal forms and the curse cast upon them by Odin. Putting all of them together adds another 777 bodies to Kratos' still increasing death tally. Then comes Ragnarok. The majority of the game is similar to the previous one in regard to how easy it is to keep track of the body count. The large sections where we play as Atreus allows me to skip sections of the game since those deaths fall on him. From start to finish, I counted 753 enemies killed directly through combat, including various bosses like the Huntress, Nidhogg, Hrist and Mist, and the satisfying end of Heimdall. One kill that may be controversial is Garm. The wolf can die and revive itself soon after, but considering it did die, I'm treating it like the end of God of War 3 with Rhodes and Sparta being spared from Zeus's wrath after the time jump, but regardless, experiencing death at least once. There aren't a whole lot of cutscene kills involving the Spartan, but there is an instance where Kratos saves his son from a Hellwalker. Now where this game gets tricky is at the end in the big final battle where Kratos leads their army into Asgard to fight Odin and his army. The scale of it is too massive for me to accurately count what's happening on screen. There are light and dark elves fighting alongside the army of the dead and the Vanir, whereas the Asgardian army has a small number of Midgardians being used as cannon fodder, while their larger forces made up of Einherjar continually die and come back to rejoin the fight. It's impossible to gauge how many forces each side has here, but on the God of War fandom wiki it specifies thousands of elves and the dead's army were lost during the battle, whereas the Vanir experienced losses in the hundreds. On the other end, the Einherjar were mostly wiped out. To try and narrow down the scale of losses here, we know for certain the Vanir lost at most 999 people. When it comes to the elves and the dead, they specified thousands, not tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands. So we can assume their losses max out at 9,999 troops each. On the other side, the Einherjar are much more difficult to obtain numbers on. Every time a soldier dies, it returns soon after and rejoins the battle, which means Asgard has an almost endless number of bodies to throw at Kratos. I started by looking into the Einherjar and their origins, learning they are possibly inspired by the Germanic Hari tribe. I couldn't find any figures estimating their size, but they are part of a larger Germanic federation that fought against the Roman Empire in 166 AD. They reportedly used 6,000 troops to bring war to what is now modern-day Hungary. An army of 6,000 constantly reviving soldiers being led by powerful Aesir gods with war machines and a massive wall keeping their larger forces out seems believable to me. Which means the maximum losses experienced during this battle would come to 26,997 between the two armies. Now that we know roughly what was lost on a mass scale, let's take a look at some big name deaths that occurred during the battle. In order for Ragnarok to join the fight first, Surtur had to die to become him. Kratos defeats Thor and shows mercy, which leads to Thor's change in mindset that is immediately snuffed out by his D-bag of a father. After Odin's defeat, Atreus traps his soul in a marble, which Sindri yoinks out of his hands and smashes it to pieces. And even though Kratos doesn't do it himself, his efforts alongside Atreus and Freya do eventually lead to this death. The last 3 named deaths are the Valkyrie Olrin, who is murdered by the new Queen of the Valkyries. And finally, Freya's brother Freyr sacrifices himself in order to save everyone else from the explosion set off by Ragnarok, which destroys Asgard, Freyr, and Ragnarok himself. The very last kills of the game occur as optional bosses, with Kratos seeking out and destroying the 12 Berserkers. But that's not the end! We got some DLC that wraps up the Norse saga. It ends with Kratos accepting the God of War position on Freya's council as they work to rebuild the realms and establish order now that Odin's stranglehold has been released. Valhalla is an interesting one to consider since it occurs within a realm that uses Kratos' past against him. It seems real since Tyr and Mimir comment on everything Kratos experiences. On top of that, the nature of the game means that any death can be excused as canon since he gets bounced right back to the beginning to try again. However, this is Kratos we're talking about here. This dude would go through each run and reach the end every single time. In order to complete this DLC, there are 6 chapters, which means Kratos would have to run the gauntlet a minimum of 6 times. Everything here occurs during gameplay, and increases the final death total by 257 kills. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing to the channel and leaving a like. It helps push the video out and encourages similar content releases like this one. To wrap everything up, it's obvious the Norse saga is a hell of a lot more calm than our time in Greece, but it still contributed tens of thousands of deaths. Who knows where Kratos will go next, but it's sure to leave a massive trail of bodies in his wake regardless. From his origins in the city of Sparta to his acceptance of his past as the god of war in a new land, Kratos is responsible for a whopping 7,843,547 deaths, nearly wiping out an entire country and culture in the process. It's going to be difficult to find another character that is as ruthless as he is, but let me know who you think will have a higher death count in the comments below. I'm King Deschain, signing off for now.